There were a lot of vampire movies made in the 1980s, but only one of them was about space vampires. That's right, space vampires. In 1985, Mr. Texas Chainsaw Massacre himself, Tobe Hooper, directed a British science fiction horror film called Lifeforce. It starred a bunch of British actors we'd never heard of, including a guy named Patrick Stewart, who would go on to a huge career in the US playing Captain Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek The Next Generation, and Professor Charles Xavier in the X-Men movie franchise. We'll take a look back at this sci-fi horror film on the next Back to the Feature.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Lifeforce uses the real-life Halley's Comet as the plot device that brings us in contact with space vampires. For those that are too young to remember, Halley's Comet is a real comet that is visible to the naked eye roughly every 75 years or so. It was last seen in 1986, so I'm assuming the filmmakers were trying to capitalize on that when they released the movie. The British-American space shuttle called Churchill finds a large alien spacecraft hidden inside Halley's Comet. Colonel Tom Carlsen decides to lead a team on a spacewalk to go check it out. And once inside, they find lots of dead alien bodies that look like giant bats. They also find 3 humanoid bodies perfectly suspended in glass cases. And did I mention that they were all buck naked? They take the 3 humanoids and one of the giant bats back to the ship. It's 30 days later and the space folks back in London have lost all contact with the Churchill, so they send the space shuttle Columbia on a rescue mission. What they find is a burned out shuttle with a dead crew. They do find the 3 humanoids intact, so they bring them all back to Earth. While the female alien is laid out on an examining table waiting to be dissected, a curious guard decides to enter the room for a closer look. But this turns out to be a big mistake. When he touches her, she wakes up and approaches him, and then she starts kissing him and drains his life force, leaving him a shriveled up corpse. As she's making her casual escape, she displays some supernatural abilities to take out some guards who are foolish enough to try and stop her. And then she just disappears out into the night. Colonel Caine is brought in to take charge of the crisis. Dr. Fallada shows him the guard's corpse and explains that the tapes on the Churchill were erased and that the escape pod is still missing. Unfortunately, due to the fire, the bodies were too badly damaged to tell if anyone was missing or not. His theory is that the female is an energy vampire and extremely dangerous, which we kind of figured out already. The remaining 2 male alien bodies are still down in a holding area in their glass cases. As they're being watched over by a couple of soldiers, their cases explode, and when the dust clears, they're just standing there staring at them. The soldiers open fire and fill them full of holes, but it doesn't even slow them down. They seem to be immune to bullets, but chuck a couple of grenades at them and they fall apart. The next scene was one of my favorites. They decide to do an autopsy on the drained guard. The makeup on this corpse is amazing. Just as the doctor gets ready to slice him open, the guard's eyes and mouth pop open, scaring the shit out of all the other doctors. The guard rises up from the table, and when he looks at his body and his hands, you can tell that he is realizing he's in really bad shape. He uses a Jedi mind trick to get the doctor to come over to him, and then he proceeds to suck the life out of him. As the energy flows between the 2 men, the doctor starts to shrivel up, while the guard starts to look more and more normal. Everybody else just stands there frozen watching, and the now restored guard freaks out and then is placed in an isolation cell. Shriveled bodies start showing up across town. The female is on the move and draining victims along the way. Back at the isolation cell, Caine and Dr. Fallada are watching the drained guard freak out. Dr. Fallada has noted that it's about 2 hours between being drained and coming back to life, so he's curious to see what happens with the guard at the 2-hour mark. And sure enough, he shrivels up and dies because it turns out if they don't get fresh energy from another person, they die for real. A couple of cells down is the doctor that was drained by the guard. He's come back to life and is still just a shriveled corpse. He's trashing the place when Dr. Fallada and Caine approach, so he rushes at them but hits the cell bars and explodes into dust on impact. The escape pod from the Churchill is found with Colonel Carlsen alive and well in it. He's brought back to the London headquarters to explain what happened on the shuttle. He tells the men how his crew secured the bodies on the ship, and then on the way back to Earth, the crew began to die one by one. He admits to starting a fire on board and using the escape pod to get away. While Carlsen dreams about sexy time with the female alien, news comes in that a large alien object has just left Halley's Comet and is headed towards Earth. Sexy dream time isn't fun for Carlsen though, as he wakes up screaming soaked in sweat. He tells Dr. Fallada that the girl is mentally connected to him somehow. Dr. Fallada hypnotizes Carlsen to capitalize on this mental link between the two of them in hopes that he'll be able to see where the girl is. It actually works, as Carlsen can see that she is now in a new body and on the hunt for a new victim. They track her down to a facility for the criminally insane, and it's here that we meet Dr. Armstrong, who is played by a younger Patrick Stewart. They find the woman and find out that the female has jumped into Dr. Armstrong. They hypnotize him to get to the female, but she escapes. Carlsen was able to get one good piece of information though. It turns out that there are more victims than they knew about, and it's spreading like a virus across London. Dr. Fallada calls Caine and Carlsen to tell them that the two male aliens are actually still alive, but one of them tried to attack him, so he killed it the old-fashioned way with a leaded iron sword through the chest. Caine and Carlsen are bringing Dr. Armstrong back with them on the helicopter when suddenly they get a bloody visit from the female alien. I'm not really sure what the point of this scene was, other than Carlsen suddenly knows that she's in London, where all hell is now breaking out. Arriving in London, the streets are filled with chaos, and they're taken to a meeting with the Prime Minister, who's acting a bit strange. Big shocker, he's an energy vampire now too, so back to the chopper they go. From a nearby military base, they can see a beam of energy rising up from London to the alien mothership parked in orbit over London. Carlsen tells Caine that all the little blue lights they see are actually the souls being taken. He can sense where her body is, and he knows that the remaining male alien will try and stop him from getting to her. Carlsen takes off on his own to get into London, and Caine gives chase. Weaving through the roads, Carlsen makes it to the cathedral where the female is laid out and working as the channel for the energy to rise up to the ship. Meanwhile, Caine mistakenly thought Carlsen was headed back to their headquarters, and so he ends up at Dr. Fallada's office. Fallada is watching the carnage out the window while the male alien soldier is lying on the table with a giant sword sticking out of his chest. Caine quickly figures out that Fallada has been exposed and is now one of the vampires. Fallada approaches Caine but forgot that he told him how to kill the vampires. Caine points his gun at him and then lowers it a couple inches before firing a single shot to the midsection. Dr. Fallada falls over dead and a blue wave of energy shoots out of his back and out the window. He's now off to join the collection of other souls being scooped up. So Caine pulls the sword out of the dead alien and takes off for the cathedral. Carlsen goes inside the crypt area where the female has been hanging out. Now she's acting all angelic in her white robe as she beckons Carlsen to join her. But meanwhile, outside, things are getting a little bit cheesy as we watch Caine make his way across town on foot, dodging all kinds of infected folks. It's a bit over the top actually, and goes on a bit longer than it should have. It was getting a little ridiculous. He finally makes it to the cathedral and ends up getting blocked at the door by the last male alien. We haven't seen this dude in forever, and he just suddenly appears at the worst time. He speaks to Caine in some deep voice like he's Gozer from Ghostbusters. You can see this next move coming from a mile away. Caine rushes up the stairs and stabs the dude with the sword. The blue lights that had been flowing into him have now turned red. He screams and there's a big puff of smoke where he stands. When the smoke clears, he's not in human form anymore. He's back to his original large-ass bat creature form. None of that matters though, as the sword is still sticking out of his chest. He whines some more and then disappears in another puff of smoke. So yeah, he's dead. Caine pulls the sword from its charred ashes and finally makes his way inside, where he finds a giant hole in the floor with a big blue flood of light coming up through it. He looks down inside the hole to see a naked coupling of Carlsen and the female. I guess space vampires don't care much for clothes. Caine yells down at Carlsen over and over until he finally pulls his head out of the love zone. He reaches his hand up and Caine throws the sword down to him. He catches it and swings it behind her, stabbing her through the back and pressing so hard that it goes through him as well. Just like with the other alien, the blue lights all turn red as their bodies start glowing. Suddenly, they merge into a ball of light and fly up through the hole and out through the roof. And the only thing left behind is the sword. Carlsen and the female beam up to the mothership and it flies away. The end. So, one of the things I like about this movie is that it was one and done. No sequels, no prequels, and no reboots. And there were only two things that got me to go see this in the theater back in 1985 in the first place. I was a teenager, so lots of nudity, and some cool makeup effects was good enough for me. One thing I did notice is how much the drained corpses in this movie look like this zombie from Return of the Living Dead that came out the same year. Did you first see this in the theater or on video? And what was it that made you want to watch it? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below to help grow this channel. I appreciate you taking time out of your day and hope you will come back for the next Back to the Feature.